Welcome back to the Cap Report. We out here re-recording this video since my laptop wanted to die on me while recording, so hopefully this audio isn't too quiet. I'm recording this at like 5 a.m, so this might be a little iffy, but I guess we'll fix it in post, worst case scenario. But that aside, UFC 287 is upon us, the MMA rematch of Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira. This is their fourth iteration of fighting, if you want to consider the kickboxing fights as well. Yeah, UFC 287, we got a great card here, as we said, Adesanya and Pereira. In the co-main, we got Burns versus Masvidal, we got Font versus Yanez as well. Yeah, this is a great card. But in this video, we will be doing some light analysis, breakdown, and predictions on the fights for this card. Now, looking back real quick, I didn't get a video out for UFC 286. I had the video scripted, I just didn't get time to record it. But we went 4-1 in predictions. I'm going to pull them up on the screen right now for you just so you can see. That takes me to 24-22 on the year, or on predictions for the year, and 161 and 110 all time. Now, we'll get into this card. As always, there's going to be timestamps in the description as well. If you're interested in specific fights, you can go down there for that. Before getting into the main card, I'm going to briefly go over my picks for the rest of the card. Picks on the full card this time around, so I'm just going to, go by and give the name and method for the wins. So in the early prelims, I have Amarim by knockout, Nurdambiek by decision, Bahamondes by knockout, Godinez by decision. For the prelims, we got Williams by decision, Meerschaert by submission, Watterson by decision, and Curtis by decision. And now going ahead and getting into the main card itself. Opening up this card, we have a battle of prospects in the bantamweight division where Raul Rodriguez Jr. takes on Christian Rodriguez. There's some debate about whether this fight deserves to be on the main card from a merit position, and I can see the arguments against it, but I can also just see from an action standpoint that it fits the role. I think this is the ability to be a banger of a fight that could really open up this card well. Both these guys are quite young and fresh into their careers. Rosas Jr. is 7-0 at just the age of 18. Rodriguez is 8-1 at 25, with his only loss being up a weight class on short notice. Rosas Jr. has a 2-inch height advantage, however Rodriguez holds a 4-inch reach advantage in this fight. Now looking at path to victory, for Rosas, I think it's obvious, you gotta get the fight to the ground. I don't think his striking is developed to the point to hold a ton of success against Rodriguez standing up, but it's worth noting that Rodriguez struggled giving his back up quite often on the ground, and he doesn't have the best takedown defense, and so I think that there's a great opportunity here for Rosas Jr. to, in scrambles, to find the back and find a submission that way. I think submission is his best chance of victory. I do think there's a decent chance of a decision win as well for him here, just because Rodriguez is such a hard guy to finish. Now for Rodriguez, he has a decent takedown defense, not the best, he does get taken down quite a bit, but he does stuff a decent amount of takedowns as well, and I think he's gonna have to use that to the best of his ability. I think if he keeps the fight standing, it's gonna be huge for him, just because of the risk he puts himself in at times, but he also does have a submission threat on the ground, particularly when getting taken down, looking for those neck chokes and whatnot. But I do fear, as mentioned earlier, that he does give himself up to too many vulnerable positions too easily at times. So I think that his best chance to win is probably, I don't know, I think it's pretty even for him, honestly. I mean, you could find a knockout win, but I do think decision and maybe submission are a little more likely, if you catch something like a guillotine. Now looking at the odds for this fight, Rosas Jr. is a -225 favorite, and Rodriguez is a +190 underdog, which I can understand. I don't have any issues with this, as stylistically the fight favors Rosas. How do I see it playing out? I think that in the first round, you'll see a lot of takedown attempts. Rodriguez will stuff a few, make it back to standing, maybe after a few as well. I think he can make it out of the first round and give Rosas issues. However, I do think that eventually he'll make a bad move and give up his back. So I have Raul Rosas Jr. by second round submission. I really want to pick Rodriguez here, but I just think stylistically it just matches up too well against him. Next, we move on to the welterweight division where Kevin Holland takes on Santiago Ponzinibbio. Both of these guys are coming in this fight on 2-2 streaks. Holland has 2 losses in a row to Wonderboy and Chimaev, but I mean, really, do we count the Chimaev fight? Ponzinibbio is coming off of a comeback knockout win over Alex Morono, and a lot of people are concerned about that fight. Ponzinibbio didn't look great in that fight. He got dropped by Morono in both the first and second round, but I will say in his defense, complete change of style and opponent, so I'm not going to hold it against him too much. Morono is a guy who excels in the short notice fights, and he's going from a southpaw opponent to an orthodox one as well. Rewatching it, it's kind of crazy that Ponzinibbio pulled out that win. That knockout late was kind of crazy. But that being said, getting more into the fight, Holland has a 3-inch height advantage and an 8-inch reach advantage as well. So looking at paths to victory for these guys, I'm going to go ahead and start with Ponzinibbio. I don't think this stacks up well for him, to be honest. He's at quite a range disadvantage and speed disadvantage. He should have the heavier of the shots, but Holland used to fight at middleweight, so I don't know if that will even be an issue. For Ponzinibbio, he does have knockout power though. For Ponzinibbio, I think he'll need to focus on leg kicks to slow down Holland and push the pressure and try to close him against the cage to tighten the range. He could look to grapple, as historically that's been the biggest problem area in Holland's game, but even that will hold risks, as Holland is built for those neck chokes to counter these type of things. An aspect I do think Ponzinibbio could catch Holland on Font is possibly using his right overhand when Holland crashes in on combinations. Holland likes to move forward at times and break the distance with his combinations, and if timed right, I think Ponzinibbio could find the knockout blow through that. Ponzinibbio, I think his best chance of winning is a knockout, either from closing Holland in against the cage, or once again, some sort of that right overhand as Holland comes crashing in. I think there's a slight chance he could get a decision and win as well through his grappling, but I think his best chance of winning this is through knockout. For Holland, I think the paths to victory are easier. As we said already, the range and size are on his side. I don't think you need to worry about him gassing in a 3-rounder. He holds the speed advantage too. I think the body kicks is something that's left open, in Ponzinibbio's stance at times. I think that's something for Holland to look for. I think Ponzinibbio will, kind of overextends at times, particularly when he's throwing punches to the body. He lunges in, kind of leaves his head exposed. And I think that with the built-in range advantage, Holland could capitalize with a check hook right there and catch him. I think Holland can choose to fight aggressively or, wait and look to counter and be successful either way. I think there's even a chance of getting a submission here, something like a Darce or a guillotine. I think it's very plausible to see him find a similar finish to his Tin Means fight where maybe he rocks him and then just jumps onto a submission when they're hurt. And in this case, I think it would come off catching Ponzinibbio overextended, or simply, off a takedown attempt if it's rushed or used to kind of slow the fight down when rocked. I see more likely Holland by knockout or decision, but I'd say there's maybe like a 20% chance of a submission happening. Now looking at the odds, Holland is a -245 favorite and Ponzinibbio is a +205 underdog. And I would agree with these odds. I might even say that I think the fight should be, maybe bigger odds comparative to how some of these other fights are on the card. For my prediction, I see it being pretty even early in the first round, with both of them kind of feeling things out before Holland starts touching Ponzinibbio up on the feet. Moving into the second round, I think Holland will really take control of the fight, maybe even dropping Ponzinibbio in the round. And then in the third, I think Ponzinibbio will have to go for the knockout, being down 2 rounds, which he gets caught there. I have Kevin Holland by 3rd round knockout. And honestly, of the fights on this card, I'd say this is probably my lock of the night. You know what I mean? Now we move on to the feature fight in the bantamweight division. A 6th ranked Rob Font welcomes 12th ranked Adrian Yanez. Now this looks like it could be a bit of a passing of the torch fight in this division, as Font comes into this fight 35 and on a 2-fight losing streak, taking a lot of damage in both of those fights. Though to be fair, they were guys at the top of the division in Jose Aldo and Chito Vera, and Font has taken a year off since, which should be good for his recovery. Yanez is 6-0 in the UFC, most recently with a split decision win over Davey Grant and a knockout win over Tony Kelly. This is by far the biggest step up in competition in Yanez's career so far, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a complete stand-up fight as both these guys primarily focus on using their boxing. Font holds a 1-inch reach advantage and height advantage in this fight, and go ahead and getting into path to victory. We're going to start with Rob Font. His jab is likely going to be the most crucial aspect of this fight. It's his most relied upon weapon, and Yanez has struggled with strong jabs at times before. It will give Font the ability to control the pace and range of the fight, and he builds off of it for a lot of his game. His forward pressure and his combinations are unlocked by the success of his jab. He lands a lot of volume as well based off the jab, and I think that he'll just need to use it early to overload Yanez with volume. I don't think Font is the best defensively despite having never really been finished. I feel there's a lack of head movement, footwork in his defensive game, which is why I think he needs to overload the output, be so offensive that it is defense for you, as in a sense your opponent can't throw back. I also think that he needs to mix in takedowns and kicks where he can, just to make it more of an MMA fight. I think if you just stick to boxing, Yanez is going to feel a lot more comfortable in it. Yanez is very boxing focused, and we've seen him be able to counter kicks, particularly high kicks, but I think Font generally likes for more push kicks and front kick styles, which I think will work because there's not as much of a risk for the takedown there. I don't think Yanez has ever completed a takedown in the UFC. Now even throw some leg kicks in there too, just to slow Yanez down. By adding all these kicks in and level changes, it will expand the defensive work once again and put more into consideration for Yanez, hopefully slowing down the offense and limiting the power shot. Maybe there's a chance Font finds a finish, but I don't really think it's that likely. If you got one, I imagine it'd be off ground and pound. If he wins this fight, I think it's gonna be very much through a decision, just because Yanez is such a good chin as well. Now shifting to Yanez's perspective, similar to how Font is focusing around the jab, for Yanez, how do I counter the jab? There's plenty of ways to do so, parrying, slipping, pulling, and whatnot. I think for Yanez, the first sense for this should be to slip and work to the body. This gets his head off the center line, which fits into a lot of his natural movements already. He's got great defensive boxing, and I think working to the body early is a great idea. As Font has great cardio and he generally keeps a higher guard, which should leave those body shots open as well. And then as hopefully over time, conditioning that guard to come down lower and opening up more heavy shots up top later in the fight. And I'd just like to see some more kicks from Yanez as well, just open things up more. I think he has brilliant combinations, and if he's able to shut down the jab, they should open up for him more easily. I think for Yanez, this could be a matchup that requires him to make some in-fight adjustments if he wants to find the finish. It's just Font, as I said, has a really solid chin, but I think it's just about finding the right angles. Chito Vera dropped him 3 times, but just a little too late in the rounds to really put Font out. I think a decision is the likely method of victory here, but I do think with the right game plan or adjustments, Yanez could find a knockout as well. Now looking at the odds for this fight, Yanez is a -180 favorite, Font a +155 underdog, and I think those odds are fine. I think honestly, they probably should just be swapped, as there's just a lot more unknown to Yanez in the sense of his level of competition. Font's more of a known commodity, and stylistically, he is the one that's going to give more issues to Yanez than vice versa. But how I see this fight playing out is Font establishing the jab early and having success with it in that first round. In round 2, I think Yanez will be able to kind of figure it out, start landing effectively, taking the second round. And I think in the third round, Yanez starts to snowball, landing strong fluid combinations. And I think that there's a solid shot he finds finish here, but I'm going to take Adrian Yanez by decision. Now we move back to the welterweight division for the co-main event, where 5th ranked Gilbert Burns takes on 11th ranked Jorge Masvidal. This is a fight that could have future title implications despite, the whole Covington looking to be the next title challenger. And we could be seeing Masvidal's final fight too, as he's hinted at retirement if he doesn't get a win here. Masvidal's coming into this fight on a 3-fight losing streak, but it's only been to the upper end of the division, twice to Usman, a knockout on a decision, and a decision loss to Covington as well. Burns comes into this fight in a 2-1 in his last 3, a loss to Hamzat Chimaev, which I personally think he won, and wins over Neil Magny and Wonderboy. Masvidal holds a 1-inch height advantage and a 3-inch reach advantage. I do think this fight could end up being a little more of a chess match than anticipated, as both these guys give a lot of looks through feints. Masvidal with kind of hard striking feints. Burns has a lot of quick twitches, just kind of hinting at takedowns and whatnot. Now looking at these guys past the victory, we'll start with Gilbert Burns. I think Burns could have some success standing up, but I don't think it's the smartest play for him here. Masvidal's probably the best or in the top 3 strikers Burns has faced, although Burns has great speed and power in the stand-up. He's got other aspects of his game he can lean on. That being said, I think the threat of the takedown alone could force Masvidal to play a much safer and rangier striking game, and I think that could give Burns more leeway in the striking. I do think his best chance is to get this fight to the ground, and work ground and pound and look for submissions though. Masvidal's a hard guy to finish, and I don't expect it to go anywhere nearly as quickly as Burns' last fight versus Mac. Masvidal has underrated takedown defense and anti-wrestling skills. He actually has over a 70% takedown defense in the UFC for his career, which I don't think most people would expect. So I don't think he should look for traditional takedowns. I think it might be better off looking for trips and body locks, and I think at best he finds a submission. At worst, you see maybe one of his performances like against Tyron Woodley or Wonderboy, where it's just a dominant wrestling performance. I think a submission and a knockout are at play here, but I do think the likely option for a win is a decision. Next, we move on to Jorge Masvidal, and I think he really only has one shot at this, and that's by knockout. He's not looking to fight this on the ground. Burns' BJJ game is just too strong, and Masvidal's strength is in the strike. I think his best chance here might be to kind of counter the heavy overhands that Burns likes to throw. Maybe he pulls an anti-wrestler, knee or uppercut against the level change as well, but Burns can get the fight to the ground without using a single or a double leg. That might not even be that effective in itself. I think as long as Burns tries to stand with Masvidal, he has a solid shot here. With that, we'll look at the odds. It has Burns as a -490 favorite, Masvidal's a +390 underdog. I do think the odds might be just a little too heavy to Burns. Maybe something closer to a -250 would be better. And how I see this playing out is the fight standing up, for the first half of the first round. Likely part of that being Burns having Masvidal up against the fence a bit. And I think the remainder of the round, Burns will attempt to move up. He'll get to the ground, attempt to move up position, and ground and pound. I think in the second, he's going to get the fight to the ground in the middle of the cage. And eventually he's going to find Masvidal's back in the submission. I have Burns by second round submission in this one. And now we move to the big one, the main event in the middleweight division. Newly crowned champion Alex Pereira seeks to defend his title in a rematch against, his most common foe, Israel Adesanya. This is the 4th time these two have faced each other, with Pereira winning all 3 matchups, twice in kickboxing, once in MMA. I think this is a really fascinating fight, as, there were so many questions going into their last fight with the emphasis of how does this fight being in MMA change their dynamic. I felt that the changes in MMA would benefit and lean to Adesanya, which I think they did for the most part. It was up 39-37 going into that 5th round before getting finished. And that to me is the oddest aspect of this rivalry, right? Of the 8 rounds they've competed against each other, Adesanya's won 6 of them, yet he hasn't come out with a win in any of their fights. I will say that's not including the 2 rounds that Pereira found knockouts, so if you want to say 6 out of 10, that's understandable. But the point is, Adesanya's won the majority of the rounds in this rivalry, but he doesn't have a win in the rivalry. It's just kind of crazy. Having the first MMA fight between these two gives us so much more information to work with than we did in their last fight, with just the two kickboxing fights to work with. I thought it was a very interesting fight, and there were a lot of trends and moments to pick up on. Having that, I want to review the first fight just briefly before getting into their passive victory for these guys. Adesanya almost finished that last fight in the first round, rocking Pereira badly at the bell. He used, in my opinion, what was one of his better techniques in the fight, which was he, would limit, block Pereira's vision with his punches. And I think that sequence is a key one to look at for Adesanya as a positive for this fight and something to work on and incorporate more of. There were other instances of this fight, other instances in the fight where leaving the hand in Pereira's face and following it up work. Surprising actually that Pereira let him leave the hand there and didn't try to move it or fight or hand fight or anything. But I think that's one of the more MMA striking pieces. That was just more time in the sport Adesanya has adjusted to more. Another similar piece to this is, Adesanya using at points the double jabbing, which kind of covers a similar aspect of, a movement or a punch covering an incoming one and the opponent not being able to see it coming. Something else I noticed for Adesanya was I feel he could have used more teep kicks to try and push back against Pereira's pressure and help keep him, from getting back into the cage. He used it here and there, but I feel like with such little threat of the takedown, there's something that he could have, used more, to keep him away from the cage more often. And I think it also would have helped with him, working to the body. This transitions into some of the observations limitations of Pereira from the first fight, something I noticed in the first fight. You know, he emitted so much pressure towards Adesanya. It just felt so imminent and ominous in that, although done patiently, he just would have consistently get Adesanya back to the cage over time. And Adesanya, for the most part, did a good job of, you know, getting out of those positions, but ultimately this pressuring and being close to the cage effectively helped Pozan find that late finish. I could be wrong on this one, but it could just be perspective, but I feel like Pereira's kicks looked and felt a lot more dangerous as well in this fight. Maybe it was just due to Pereira being very cautious and protective of anything Adesanya threw high, but it just was something else I noticed. I also feel like if Izzy had any sense of a BJJ game, he would have finished this fight in the third round. You know, he had Pereira's back for a while, and at points, he was trying to get the hooks in on the legs, but just never got them in. But he never even looked for rear naked. I mean, I will say he was landing damage with his strikes, so it is getting into nitpicky territory, but I just can't help feeling like if it was a missed opportunity, if Izzy just had a better BJJ game, he would have found a finish in this fight. One final note from the first fight that I noticed that could impact or influence this next fight is decisions and ability at close range. He clinches up a lot, but I feel like he didn't do enough with the positions, and at times got outworked within them by Pereira. In connecting the clinching concept with that ability to land significant damage from outside of Pereira's field of view, I think there's an argument to be made for Adesanya to be looking to land in the disengagement from the clinch. Looking for hooks there could be effective, as you would be out of the sight line of Pereira, or, you know, even uppercuts, because how Pereira holds his guard higher, more of a sight line opening through the middle, there is an opening for those uppercuts. And these are just ways to build off of his success for the first fight. I think too, to build off the clinch work, at times Adesanya did a good job of framing, and I'd like to see him throw more elbows from these positions as he frames them, or even in the disengagement from the clinch as well. And these are the main notes I took from the latest rewatch of their previous fight. I just thought it would be good as a baseline, just things I've noticed that I think will tie into some of their past victory and adjustments in this. We'll start with Adesanya. It's interesting looking at, you know, how to adjust for this rematch for Adesanya. Do you continue to try and grapple or abandon it, because it definitely played a role in him gassing a bit in that 5th round? I think there's different game plans you could take. One could definitely include grappling, even if it's just to lessen the threat of Pereira striking and to give Adesanya more feints and room to work within his striking. At the forefront of Adesanya's game plan, in my opinion, should just be finding a way to deal with that pressure of Pereira. I think pulling from my note from the first fight, as I said, you gotta use more of the teep kicks just to kind of keep pushing him back and, you know, keeping yourself from getting back into the cage. I don't think you have to worry too much about Pereira catching it and taking you down, although I do imagine his grappling has improved quite a bit. I don't think that's going to be his first instinct when you know, are throwing kicks at him. And I think the more kicks to the body in general will help, even if it's just to lower Pereira's guard somewhat. You know, the leg kicks were nowhere near as effective as they were against most of his opponents, but I wouldn't abandon them completely, as it still gives another aspect of the striking for Pereira to consider. As mentioned previously, I think improving upon Adesanya's clinch game could help a lot too. Looking for elbows and hooks off the disengagements, I think he might have to get in closer, you know, more into boxing range at times as well, and using that, you know, that concept of hand parrying, blocking Pereira's vision. I think Izzy can still win this fight by decision or knockout. It's just gonna be really tough for him. And for Pereira, I don't know how much you really change here. You know, it took some time, but by the 5th round, he really figured out how to combine the pressure and cage cutting into, you know, catching Adesanya. He'll have a lot of natural growth in grappling if it comes up again, and although I don't think he's gonna look to enter that territory willingly. I mean, it's something he could. You know, one adjustment I'd like to see him make is more hand parrying instead of just allowing Adesanya to leave his hands up in his guard. You know, it got him rocked in the first round, and I think for him it'll be a lot of in-fight adjustments. You know, what's Adesanya's game plan going to look like, and what are Adesanya's adjustments going to be? You know what I mean? And you know, adjusting to that. The path of victory for Pereira is to continue to exude that pressure, carefully moving forward and getting Adesanya's back to the cage, cutting it off and forcing him to move into that left-handed death, you know what I mean? Similar to Adesanya, I think Pereira can win through decision or knockout. Now to look at the odds, Adesanya is a slight favorite at -135, Pereira is a +115 underdog, and I understand the aspect of Adesanya had controlled a lot of the original fight. He's more accustomed to MMA striking. I feel like at this point in their rivalry, you have to have Pereira as the favorite. Now where do I stand on this fight? You know, I've gone back and forth quite a bit because I do feel Adesanya is due a win in this rivalry, with how he's been the better fighter in most of it despite not having a single win. But at the same time, I think it just might be the case that Pereira has Adesanya's number, and you know, that happens in MMA. I think Pereira really found his stride at the end of that last fight, and I wonder if he can carry that into this fight. I worry that Adesanya will look to implement wrestling too much into this fight, and I don't think it's the best idea. I think this plays out early on very similar to the previous fight, in that there's a lot of, you know, it's a bit tense opening, a lot of feints, both of them giving looks just to see how the other reacts. You know, leg kicks early, some jabbing, Pereira slowly trying to back Adesanya into the fence. You know, very similar to the first round of the fight, except for I don't think Pereira gets caught early. I think Adesanya looks to grapple more earlier on in the second round, which will be somewhat effective, but towards the end of the round, Pereira tags him once or twice here. In the third round, I think the pressure really starts to take effect. Pereira tags Adesanya here and there against the cage. You know, Adesanya looks for, you know, kind of panic shoots for a takedown and gets caught with a knee. I have Alex Pereira by 3rd round knockout. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty conflicted about this fight. I really don't know what to expect, particularly from Adesanya. Their team is great at cooking up game plans, but I think Pereira really just is a bad matchup for Adesanya. The size and range take away Izzy's most used advantages against a lot of his opponents. With the added piece of power, it just makes the fight a minefield for Izzy to work through, especially with the smaller gloves. Ultimately, I think that it's the same issue Blachowicz gave him, and that people ever wanted to give credit, not the takedowns, but the ability to check the leg kicks, throw them back, and match Adesanya in his kickboxing ability, particularly when Adesanya doesn't act upon the traps and feints he sets up too. It's just too much for him to overcome. Yes, in the case of Blachowicz, the weight and the wrestling made a huge difference, but it wouldn't have mattered or would have been possible without, the earlier aspects mentioned, matching and kickboxing. I honestly have reasons that I'd like to see either guy win here, so I'm happy invested. I wouldn't be disappointed either way, but I don't know.